just want to run through hands here real quick, rapid fire. Let's go. First hand, there's a guy who opens on my right. It's at 50, 100. He's been opening a decent amount already, and I go ahead and decide to 3-bet with ace-3 off. I get cold called by someone in the hijack. It folds around. Flop comes king-jack-5 rainbow. I decide to c-bet. He calls. Turn comes an offsuit 10, which I'm not super excited about, and I actually think I made a mistake by double barreling here. He calls. River's a 9, and at this point I felt like it was pretty likely that he would, just always have better and not really have many hands he could fold, so I just checked to give up, and he showed pocket 5s for flopped bottom set. This next hand we're at 100, 200. I have about 18,000, which is down from about 26k starting stack. I open queen 8 of spades in the cutoff to 550. Button, who's a good player, makes the call. Flop is 8-5-3 rainbow, and I decide to bet 600. He calls. Turns the 7 of spades, so I turn a flush draw. I bet 1200. He pretty quickly makes it 4250. It's kind of an awkward sizing, but given how much equity I have against everything in his range, I make the call. The river's the queen of diamonds, and I check. He bets 5350. At this point, he's a strong player. I think he's going to have bluffs, and I pick up one of the better cards in the deck for me, so I decided to make the call. He has ace-6 of spades, and we're good. In this next hand, we are at 150, 300 with a 25 ante, which is level 3, and I don't have the stack sizes here. I think I'm reasonably close to starting stack at this point, probably a little bit lower. I open 10-9 offsuit in the hijack to 800. The big blind, who is a tight player, is the only caller. Up comes ace-9-7 with 2 clubs. He checks, I c-bet 900, and he calls. Turns the 9 of clubs, he checks, I go ahead and bet 1700 now, and he calls again. The river's the 2 of hearts, and I bet 2700 now. You could maybe argue going a little bit bigger, but I figure it's kind of scary when I triple barrel, so to try to keep it more of his hands, I sized it down a little bit. He makes the call, and my hand is good. In this next hand, we're skipping ahead a bunch. I decided not to go over some of these hands that were more straightforward or less interesting, so here you go. We're at 200, 400 with a 50 ante. I think I have about 18 or 20k at this point. A middle position loose opener makes it 10.50 to go. Folds to me in the small blind, and I make the call with king 8 of spades. The big blind also calls. The flop comes king 9-3 rainbow. It checks to the pre-flop raiser, who bets 1400, and I make the call. I think that's pretty standard. Not much reason to check raise here on this board. The big blind also calls, and we go 3 ways to a turn. It turns the jack of clubs and checks around. At this point, I'm fairly worried I don't have the best hand. The big blind overcalling the flop is pretty concerning, and while I do expect to be ahead of the initial raiser, it doesn't help if I'm losing to the big blind. But it checks through on the turn, and the river's the ace of hearts, another not that great card. I check, big blind now bets 4500, and the initial raiser folds. Now, at first glance, the river card looks like a better card for the initial raiser, so to have the big blind lead into him, I think he's pretty strong. I think he's usually going to have 2 pair or better. So I just decided to let it go. No real point to hero here, especially kind of around the stack size. This next hand, I am up to 52,000. We are at 250, 500 with 75 ante. A middle position player opens. I 3-bet with ace-king off. He shoves it in for about 13,000 total, and I obviously get it in. He has pocket 5s. The board runs out jack 6-6, deuce 7, and he holds. This next hand happens at 300, 600 with a 100 ante. I have about 24k to start the hand, and it's going to be blind versus blind. So the small blind, who has been opening very wide, opens to 1800. I'm in the big blind with 6-4 of spades, and I decided to make the call. I think you could go either way here. You don't really have to defend, but against this particular guy in position, I like calling. The flop comes ace-5 deuce with 1 spade, which is not that bad of a flop. Even though he's opening, he's not going to have a lot of ace-x. So, having a gut shot, having a backdoor flush draw, and having 1 over to the 5 is actually pretty decent. So he bets the same amount, 1800 on the flop. I decide to just peel. I don't think we can really represent a lot by raising. We definitely have 2 pair and sets in our range, but I don't even know if I would raise those hands, so I just call, planning to evaluate turns and maybe try to raise then, or just bet if he checks. The turn is a 10 of diamonds. He checks, and I bet 3,200. I probably could have gone bigger. I felt like I didn't need to bet that big to get the job done, but I don't know, going a little bigger just to kind of ensure he folds seems like a kind of good way to go. I didn't go over all the hands I played with this player, but he's been winning kind of lots of medium-sized pots off me, so I just said something like, just let me win this one, like it's okay if I win this one. And he ended up folding. He said that the speech is what did it. This next hand happens at the same blind level, 300, 600 with a 100 ante, and against the same player. He opens the cutoff to 1800, and I call on the button with king 8 of spades. I think I could 3-bet here, but he's opening pretty wide, and this hand's way ahead of his range, and the blinds haven't really been, overcalling that wide against the sizing, so I kind of like flatting better. Anyway, king 8 of spades. The flop comes king 5-4, we're heads up. He bets 1800 again, and I call. Seems pretty standard, no real reason to raise here. The turn's an offsuit 3, and he checks. I could go for a bet here, but against this player, I'm just kind of trying to let him bluff as many streets as possible when I have top pair. So while there are some bad cards for us, I feel like checking back is still the best option. The river brings one of those not so great cards. It's a deuce, and he now leads for 5,000. I thought that this was such a good bluff card, and he might check ace-x on the flop some of the time, that I just felt like it was a call. It was more of a bluff kind of sizing. Like, I felt like if he had a straight, he might size smaller. So I just decided to call. I'm pretty high up in my range for hands that check back the turn. I definitely do have some ace-x, so maybe I could just call with straights, but that seems a little iffy. So I make the call, and he turns over 8-6 offsuit, so we lose that one. The last level of the night was pretty crazy, so the rest of the hands are from that level. I have about 20,000 to start this hand, 300, 600 with a 100 ante. Under the gun, middle position, and the small blind, who is this kind of crazy player who I've been playing with, they all limp. So there's 3 of them in. I'm in the big blind. I have king, queen offsuit. I go ahead and decide to make it 2,800, and everyone calls. So we go 4 ways to a flop. Flop is jack 7-5 rainbow. Small blind checks, and I think it's pretty marginal to bet here. The thing is, if we do bet and get called, we do have 2 overs, but I think we're representing a lot of strength by betting this flop into 3 people. And nobody's folding a jack, but we might get folds from like 7x, 5x, and some gut shots, which is definitely good. I can barrel on aces. I will make the best hand some of the time. I decided to bet 3,500. I don't think I need to go that big, and I really want to preserve my stack size at this point. This is also around the sizing I would make it with a value hand anyway, so I'm kind of inherently balanced. Under the gun folds, and middle position, who I've played with before, kind of waggles his eyebrows at me. And instantly, this kind of gives off the vibe that he's not that strong. Not necessarily that he doesn't have a jack, but just that he's not, at the top of his range. He doesn't have sets for sure. He probably doesn't have 2 pair. He could even, maybe have ace high. I don't know about that. I don't know if he's floating that wide, but basically I didn't think he was that strong. Small blind folds, we go heads up to a turn card. The turn, I wasn't super happy to see. It pairs the board with a 7, and I just decided to check. I felt like he would kind of telegraph the strength of his hand, and so by checking, if he bets, I can just fold. If he checks it back, I can, make a decision on the river about whether I want to bluff, and I can also sometimes hit a card. He checks it back, and the river is the ace of spades. Now, I did say he might float the flop with ace-x, but I also think he might just bet that on the turn. It's kind of pure speculation at this point, but I think a lot of his hands are missed straight draws, very weak jack-x, like jack 9 off, jack 8 off, and then 5x. I don't think he really ever has a 7. I think he's just going to bet that on the turn. So I go ahead and bet 7,000, and he folds pretty quickly. At some prompting, and I don't do this often, I did show my king high, and he said that was good, so I'm guessing he had some kind of straight draw. So we are getting towards the end of the night here. There's only 15 or 20 minutes left on the clock. Early position on my immediate right, so same player I've been playing a bunch of hands with, makes it 1,800 to go. I wake up with red aces next act, and I make it 6,300. I have 3-bet him a couple other times, and I've made it kind of smaller, and he's always called, so I'm just inching my sizing up here. I think there's no reason to go smaller. Folds around, and he does indeed make the call. I have about 29,000 or so to start this hand. The flop comes okay. It's not great. It's 5-4-3 with 2 clubs. He checks, and the stack sizes are a little bit weird. I considered checking back, but I think the board's too wet and I just have to bet to get value. And there's also scare cards on the turn where he might call the flop, but once the turn comes, he doesn't like it. So I just go ahead and bet. I bet 8,300, which I think you could debate the sizing. It's a little on the big size, but he's been willing to call big sizings, so I think it's valuable to do so. He goes ahead and shoves. Now, the thing you have to understand about this player, and I didn't really talk about a lot of the hands that I lost to him, but a lot of the hands that I played with him, I got check raised on like the turn. And sometimes I had air and had to fold. Sometimes I actually had something like top pair and I called and just got shown a better hand by the river. But the thing was, he was willing to mix it up. He was willing to put bluffs in. He was willing to put semi-bluffs in. So at the end of the day, there's just too little behind for me to make a fold here. My hand's too strong, way too close to the top of my range. This might be the top of my range. Ace King of clubs, I guess rivals it because, I have value against basically anything in his range. I go ahead and call all in. He has King Queen of clubs for a pretty sick sweat just a few minutes before the end of the day. Hoping for some good news. Really, really just want to win this one and get up to a respectable stack size again. The turn is a 7 of hearts. Great card, although it does introduce some chop possibilities. The river, Queen of hearts. I hold. With 10 minutes left on the clock, they draw for the number of hands to play, and they draw 7. This hand is the 5th of those 7, so it's third to last hand of the night. It folds around to me on the button, and I have Ace-8 offsuit. I go ahead and raise it up to 1,400. The big blind is pretty tight, and the small blind's a regular, clearly a decent player. To my surprise, he 3-bets to 5,300, folds back to me, and you could go one of two ways here. I think it's totally fine to fold. It's the third to last hand of the night. I have about 55K before this hand starts, and that's going to be good for well over 50 big blinds on day 2. However, I do think that this is a spot a good player is going to exploit where I'm opening the button and he just 3-bets because we are in the third last hand of the night and I did just double up and get these chips and don't want to lose them. So I think there is a lot of validity to 4-betting. I thought a lot about my sizing. At the end of the day, I just wanted to make it big enough to show, that I'm putting in a substantial portion of my stack. So I ended up 4-betting to 12,300 and he folds pretty quickly. And that's it. That's the last hand I play. I bag up 69,600. Tomorrow we'll come back to 400, 800 with a 100 ante. So I bagged up exactly 87 big blinds. This is like a perfect stack size. I'm super excited to finally end the day 2 drought and bag it up. I'm not sure if I'll be able to do another video tomorrow if I make another day, if I find another bag, but I will do my best. So thank you guys for watching. I apologize for the last video being very cobbled together, and I will be trying to put a little more time into them. It's just been hard when I've been playing basically every day for most of the day. Still trying to find that balance, so I do appreciate you guys sticking with me. And let's go crush it on day 2.